All right. Third time's the charm. It's a beautiful thing. It is that time of the week. It is your weekly dose of monkey business. I am your host. As always, my name is John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Wait, hang on a second. No.
I'm Pete Best.
You're Pete Best? Actually, I think you would be more along the lines of the guy who's like the brains behind it all. What was his name?
Brian Epstein.
There you go, Epstein. Thank you. I couldn't think of that name for a moment. So here we are in the studios of WFC3. We're hanging out for our usual entertainment. We're entertaining ourselves. And in the studio with me, as always, is the media legend, Billy DeTore.
Huh? What? Yeah.
The slightly legendary, but getting in there, like her stars on the rise, Tanya Metris.
Hi.
Our producer, Sherry.
Hello.
And associate producer, Chris is here.
Hello.
We're missing a Rob, but we have a Dolly.
Hi.
Hi, Dolly.
Hello.
And handling all of the one-liners, zingers, and bad puns will be Captain Zach over there.
Hello, and thank you for my tenure here because I'm getting fired after this one. No
Probably. It's probably
After?
it's after, maybe
During.
I meant this statement.
So let's start off with some business. Our Patreon is starting to get some ground going. There's some people hanging out and checking it out and noticing what we're doing over there. So thank you very much especially to our very first Patreon subscriber, the young Miss Sarah Elizabeth. Thank you, Sarah Elizabeth. We love you dearly.
Yay.
And as a matter of fact, on the day that we're recording this, which is what it was today, the 26th, it's Sarah's birthday today. So a huge happy birthday to Sarah. Yay. And also on the list of people to throw shout-outs in the general direction of is a name that's familiar to Zach over here.
That's right.
Is Alan Upsitnik.
That's right, the old man himself.
The old man himself is actually supporting us, so we really, truly appreciate it, Al. And we hope you're feeling better quick. We heard you had a little, some bionics. We'll make them bigger, stronger, faster. Is that what's going on?
Well, hopefully he'll be in the next Olympics.
The next Olympics.
Higher, faster, stronger. No,
there it is.
He's doing well. I saw him over Thanksgiving. Everything is on the up and up.
Outstanding. Well, mend fast, Alan, and thank you, sir, for your support. If you are interested in joining us on Patreon and subscribing to our podcast and all of the extra good stuff that goes with it, you can find us on the Patreon website under FC3 ROC. If you're also interested in sponsoring or advertising outside of Patreon, you can reach out to us at sponsors@fc3roc.com. And now the business is out of the way. We're moving on. And today's topic is going to be fun. This is kind of cool because I've always kind of been tinkering with the idea of getting into this particular culture myself. In the studio today, we have none other than Eric Brewer. Mr. Brewer, among his many talents, is one of the heads. Is the head or one of the heads?
I'm just an instigator.
An instigator. Oh, we like you already. He is an instigator of the Rochester Steampunks. And Eric has agreed to come in today to tell us a bit about Steampunk, what it is, what it was, and what it will be. And Eric, your alter ego is I think I wrote this down correctly, Professor Vertigus Wetware. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
And what's the professor's his idiom there?
Well, Professor Vertigus Wetware is the superintendent of the Mechanicsburg Asylum for the Wrathful and Sullen.
Okay.
Also consult at the county home for the inconvenient.
Okay.
And is an alienist, specialist in nervous and mental diseases.
I want all of our listeners to appreciate.
Fit right in.
Yeah, because I want all of our listeners need to take note of where those places are and those places in history, because this is where the entire cast of Monkey Business will be winding up, probably in the next few years. Come visit us, especially your beloved host, me. All right, so Eric, Steampunk. Tell me a little bit more about it. What is Steampunk?
Oh dear. Well, many things. As a word, it was coined in about 1987 by a science fiction writer named K.W. Jader, describing the work that he and his three drinking buddies, Tim Powers and James Blaylock, were writing in a environment of placing science fiction inside a Victorian context and aesthetic. The big thing in science fiction at the time was cyberpunk,
right?
Which everybody knows about.
Oh yeah, Neuromancer is still on my list of books to read.
Wonderful book. And he wrote a letter to his editor at Locus, speculating that the next big thing would be neo-Victorian science fiction, something like, I don't know, steampunk. and just threw off the word.
Okay.
The thing is, the word described something that had been around for quite a while before that.
Right. Well, it's Jules Verne, H.G. Wells. It kind of dabbles in it, doesn't it? Does that kind of touch it? Or those granddaddies?
Well, they're granddaddies. They were Victorian-era science fiction writers. There was nothing neo-Victorian about them. They were right in the midst of it. But that look has been there. The Disney 2001 League Under the Sea, the Wild Wild West, the last scene in a time travel trilogy. So the word now finally existed to describe a thing that people regarded as cool.
And now, so the neo-Victorian, that's applying like modern sensibilities to an era of the late 1800s, I'm assuming.
Or bringing the design sensibilities of the mid to late 1800s forwards into science fiction.
Okay.
And also into fashion, into art. Around the time the word was dropped, the internet started doing things. This is the beginning of the rise of social media and the sharing of visual images over social media was what you did. You scroll, it's pretty. And the steampunk aesthetic is striking. It's pretty, and it was something somewhat familiar because most people had seen something of that before. But this started to feed into the internet too,
and you go all in with it. I'm you're sitting across the table from me today as a proper gentleman. You know, the aesthetic of how you carry yourself. Is this something you've carried not only just, it's not a hobby, this is kind of a lifestyle for you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. I mean, it's an organizing theme for how I cut my mustache, how I do my facial hair, the way I dress, and the cufflinks I would choose in the morning.
Right.
How I would tie my necktie. So one has to do this as an organizing aesthetic. There are many different ones, no one more valid or not than any other.
Right.
This happens to work for me.
That's outstanding.
I know. I'm like looking at his tie right now, and I just love how the knot is up at the neck of how it looks like it's braided or...
It's called an eldritch knot.
Eldritch. Okay. Very
cool. It's really cool.
Now, 1987, the word is coined, and it starts to kind of integrate itself into modern culture with the internet and whatnot. You discover this when?
Well, let's see. For me, mustache wax was a gateway drug. Back when I was an undergraduate.
Okay.
That is a long, long time ago.
Yeah, 1993, 94?
That era. Or earlier.
Okay.
So I'd always liked the Victorian look.
Okay.
And I would hang around in consignment clothing places looking for a nice vest or waistcoat. Had that. At one point in my life, I was wearing entirely too much black. And
we're all guilty of that at one point or another.
Fortunately, my wife reminded me that, no, you're not a goth. You're steampunk, if anything.
I actually once heard steampunk described as when goth found brown.
Well, both share an appreciation for the Victorian aesthetic. Goth comes from its own origins. It has its own aesthetic. It came out of a music and club scene.
Right.
Which steampunk, more than anything else, comes out of a science fiction visual aesthetic. So there are differences, but you go to steampunk conventions, and goths are fine with wearing leather. So they do tend to come in and feel comfortable in that environment. One of the leading steampunk bands is Abney Park, and they started in the goth club scene.
I have heard of them, yeah.
And they've moved out in other directions. Steampunk sort of has this magpie aesthetic about it, so picks bits and pieces from elsewhere. So Abney Park, they've gotten into circus music, they've gotten into world music. There were many other steampunk bands as well, but they started in the goth scene.
I see. Now, is Abney Park, pardon my minimalist way of putting this, but are they kind of like the Led Zeppelin of the steampunk movement at the moment, or?
I think they're one of the first bands to self-consciously identify as steampunk.
Okay.
There are others, but they're the most well-known.
Gotcha.
And have one of the larger fan presences.
Okay. So we'll take you back in time just a little bit. So you're an undergrad, and you're discovering that whole Victorian aesthetic. Steampunk is still a little ways off in terms of an actual living term at this point. And a lot of Jules Verne, a lot of H.G. Wells, a lot of those writers are on your shelf, I'm assuming, at this point?
Yes. I'm an old-line science fiction nerd.
Okay.
So you'll also find Isaac Asimov, I, Robot. You'll find Heinlein. You'll find Jerry Pournelle. Certainly you'll find Tolkien as well.
Oh, yeah. His own way.
And Ursula Le Guin. So my early con going was the old line science fiction conventions.
Okay.
Doing cosplays of Ming the Merciless and as part of Buck Rogers and a High Priest of Cthulhu and that sort of thing. And,
well, now you're Zach's best friend over there. That's definitely good. You got his attention.
There we go.
So I'm assuming that basically there were clubs and there was gatherings that, and you said old line conventions, things like this. So this was not something like suddenly everything was embodied in 1987 and you're off and running. There was stuff going on beforehand.
Yes, other writers started writing neo-Victorian themed science fiction. Some very good, a lot of it Drek. It had always been there as something cool looking. So you find a lot of steampunk elements in, say, Hellboy, in the movies. So people, once it gets out on the internet, it's impossible to trace anything. But people started showing up at science fiction conventions, at manga, anime, and gaming conventions in a steampunk aesthetic, and then spun off its own conventions as well.
I think that's the first time I remember seeing it was, I want to say a good 20 plus years ago, and I was at Sterling Renaissance Festival, and here I am dressed in my garb appropriate for a Renaissance Festival, and everybody was doing the same for the most part, except for like that 1%. There was a couple of people who were fashioned in such a way that it was like, wait a minute, that looks out of place, but it's very cool. I want to get to know more about it. And of course, as soon as you engage them, they're in character, and they just write out of H.G. Wells's the Time Machine book, and they're talking to you like that, like they're Victorian, and they've come back just to check things out. So that was my first brush with it. I'm like, I need to know more about this, and that's when I learned that word, steampunk. So for me, it was a whole introduction right there at the beginning of the current movement. But you were in it long before that, and so my question is this: when that word hits the scene, and it's suddenly now other people are learning about this, and you've been kind of in this culture all along. How does that the creation that coming into existence of that word, how does that solidify things for you? Where do you go when you hear it the first time?
My experience is similar to that of several of many other people. We had been sort of doing that, and the word comes by, and somebody says, that's steampunk. You're doing steampunk, and you've not heard it before, and then you look it up on the internet. By George, I guess I have been.
There you go.
The rap artist, Professor Elemental.
Oh, really?
That's his story. He hadn't known what steampunk was, but somebody let him know that, yes, that is what you're doing.
Okay.
Whether you know it or not. So he had that Victorian aesthetic and his own odd sense of humor and his rap stylings. He put out his video, Cup of Brown Joy, and people said, "Oh, that's what you are." Oh, I guess so then. So it's a fairly common origin tale for steampunks that we had been doing it for a while already.
And then suddenly it's like, oh, you've given me this legitimacy that I already had.
There we go. I don't need your permission, but thank you.
Hey, much appreciated.
Thank you for the search term.
There you go. Now, it makes it easier to find on the internet now.
Now, steampunk in more recent pop culture, is Wicked sort of a steampunk feel? The book, I sort of got that feel as I read the book.
Well, it's a
Wicked.
Victorian book. Oz is a Victorian book. So if you're doing set design, you're looking for something, certainly. Because you're looking, the set designers are looking for something visual and something visually striking. They could use that for Wicked. Locally, a couple of years ago at the Fringe Festival, they had a wonderful staging of The Tempest in steampunk.
Huh. That's cool.
Are you familiar with the series of comics that have come out basing more recent characters in a steampunk Victorian era? Green Hornet, Red Sonja, Batman, Vampirella. All have steampunk comic books. Legendary, Derry, Legendary. And they're kind of fun.
So our others are kind of bringing themselves to the steampunk aesthetic?
Yes.
Okay. Do you find that now that you've got this search term and you have a little bit more of an eyesight of what the rest of the world is doing when it comes to this particular culture, are you finding that it has like a tidal kind of way of it comes and it goes? Or it wanes and it gets really popular but then fades off? Or
Oh, absolutely. If you go back to Google, and you can, it will very easily graph any search term you want. Okay. And so for several years, it almost looked exponential with the use of people searching for steampunk. It's leveled off. It's going down. Those who are interested in it probably have figured it out already.
Right.
I don't think we were ever really meant to take over the world. I don't think it's going to go away.
No.
People have been saying goth is dead for how many decades now? And
several.
They just look that way. But actually, it's a very, very creative and vital community.
Yeah.
And steampunk will remain so as well.
And now the club itself, Rochester Steampunks,
Yes.
how long has that been active at this point?
Oh, dear. 5, 6 years, 7 years, something like that. We're a loose collection.
Okay.
We gather about quarterly. Knox seems to be the most congenial place we found to get together.
They're great. That's one of our we call it our living room. We have a lot of meetings and hangouts there.
I was just there the other night.
Yeah, it's a wonderful spot.
Their new annex is
Yes.
wonderfully Victorian decorated.
Oh, I'm sure you feel right at home there.
Absolutely.
Well, it's designed after Sherlock Holmes's flat.
Okay.
So it's the wallpaper,
wallpaper
stuff
and
is
the decor,
all
the fireplace.
Sherlock Holmes, Victorian England.
Which then fits in perfectly with our friends at the Great Escape Room because they have their whole Sherlock Holmes aesthetic as well. So we can.
I know. I was just talking to Aaron Friday night and saying that we were going to have Eric in the studio. He goes, I love Eric.
That's awesome. Awesome.
They're on their way to Disney currently.
Now, as a club, is it basically just a group of like-minded folks? You can just talk about things. Do you help each other with designs and whatnot?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll bring work in progress to show off or brag about. Sometimes we'll get together outside to go to an event or have a picnic. We if a couple of us show up simultaneously at a given event, we add a little bit of color to it.
Okay.
We do, again, it's very visual, so it attracts the eye. And so we've been kindly invited to a number of things. Our most recent was at the Rochester Mini Maker Fair.
Yes. Yep. At the convention center.
Which is very important with steampunk, because one of the things I think that helped it take off is that we'd also bumped into the maker movement.
Okay.
The aesthetic can serve as an organizing theme for people whose maker interests, maker skills are in a number of different areas. So instead of, well, everybody here does woodworking, it's now that person does woodworking, that person does metalworking, this person is 3D printing, that person is quilting and sewing, but the organizing theme is it's all steampunk.
Okay.
So one of the things that exists in steampunk is a bit of a reaction against the mass-produced, the mass-marketed.
Right. The more handcrafted you're pushing towards?
The Victorian aesthetic of arts and crafts was just before the industrial design movement.
Okay.
So it was very much the individual craftsperson doing what they could for the aesthetic. So particularly when starting out, of course now everything is there on Etsy, even if it ought not to be.
Yeah.
There is the song by Sir Reginald Pike Devant, just glue some gears on it and call it steampunk.
I've heard that phrase, actually. I don't know if I heard the song, but...
Yeah, you do need to hear the song.
Yeah, okay.
Also see a number of his other videos, which are hysterically funny. He has a wonderful voice, too. And he comes out of the British music hall tradition as a steampunk performer. But we collided with the maker movement. So from people who like custom fitting their own cars to people who like making their own jewelry, again, it serves as an organizing principle around which you can base... you can get ideas, you can get themes, and go to town with it.
That's cool. That is very cool. Now, two project questions. First of which is, what is the favorite thing that you yourself have crafted or have come up with?
Oh, dear. Probably the most iconic that I've done is I figured out how to mount a working clock in a top hat.
I saw that picture. And it was amazing. That's what I was talking about earlier.
Was that the picture from the Makers Fair that you were talking about?
The hat with the gear, the clock on it, and the goggles. And
okay.
I was like, ooh.
Is that uncomfortable to wear, or you've got it kind of down where you're used to it?
Well, I've used a quartz movement. I considered using a old-time clockwork, which strictly would have been better, but in order to get it large enough, the thing is going to weigh several pounds. And
okay, I see it. Tanya's called up a picture.
The other thing I had to face was whether or not to make it use alarm chimes. But I tend towards migraine, so the idea of the Westminster chimes going off between my eyes on the hour and a half hour
Yeah, probably
Not exactly a
just
good thing.
wasn't on. And the alternative was cuckoo. And consider that I am a psychiatrist both in my day-to-day life and in my steampunk
Wow.
persona. That just seemed to be bad form.
Actually,
Zach, do you have a question?
To kind of back up to, you mentioned the 3D printing and all that. Do you feel that as the 3D printing has become more user-friendly and prevalent, that it's a good thing for the movement, or is it kind of cheapening it to a degree because it makes things a lot easier to manufacture instead of putting in a lot more work and having it really be a personal creation, as it were?
If 3D printing was easy, I would be doing it. So I think that people who do good quality 3D printing say, yeah, you think it's easy? Okay, here's a terminal. Go right to it, sir. I'll be in the background having a cup of coffee, and when you crash your system or create a burning, smoldering hunk of junk, you'll tell me how easy it is. So you have to do the design. You have to realize it in a way. So you can do very good quality 3D printing with a lot of sculpting in it and design, or you could do garbage if you want, and I'm sure people do. But so you can do poor quality oil painting as well.
I'm good at that. Just give me oil paints, and I'll look like Jackson Pollock had a really bad day.
Yeah.
That's basically that's the sum total of my artistic
what
quality.
I liked because we were at the Rochester Mini Maker Fair also, but we were across the way from you guys. Just looking.
Jackson Pollock had a good day.
Just looking at the repurposing of like the Nerf guns and things like that, and making it steampunk rather than it being the big orange mega Nerf gun. Now it's been repurposed to be a steampunk one. And it was just amazing to just see the craftsmanship that went in because you have to be creative
Just modding
and
that stuff,
artistic
yeah.
and stuff in order to take something that's already been one thing and then repurpose it into something else.
There's a lot of found object work in steampunk, including found objects being what you find at your desk, what you find at your workstation. So one of the found objects was a high-end gaming console that Jay spent a lot of time and a lot of creativity figuring out how to give it a steampunk aesthetic and work that in. So that was his item as well.
And that's a picture of that right now. I see it.
That's, I believe.
Yeah. He had it with him at the Makers Fair, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes.
All right. No, go ahead.
When we first started learning about steampunk, and we used to look up a lot of things, and one of my favorite things that I ever saw that was modded was a regular keyboard that was modded to look like a typewriter. Mm-hmm. It was just an amazing piece, and it stuck with me for years.
That piece and the maker who made it have a interesting history, and unfortunately a sad one. The artist got he died a number of years ago under a very unfortunate situation. Long before a light went out of the world. That was owned at the time by Thomas Williford, who is one of the better known steampunk makers who's currently active. And he auctioned it off online with the proceeds going back to the family of the artist who made it. But that was his work was wonderful, a technomancer, I believe, is what he went by.
I like the names.
Technomancer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a certain there's an aesthetic that you know what, in my personal opinion, and I've often thought this. There's a certain attitude and aesthetic that steampunk brings back to this modern time. That the society could probably live very happily with integrating that back in. There's a certain way of looking at the world. Yeah, it's we've gotten so used to belittling intelligence and class and style and dignity, and here's this culture that is all about class and style and dignity and imagination, and that's one of the things that I've always really appreciated about steampunk.
There's a bit of a reaction against the rise of the schlub.
Yeah.
The rise of the very informal aesthetic. Everything looking like a beige box. So we do get fussy. One of the things we try to keep in mind is that essentially steampunk is daffy.
It embraces itself as such.
That's good. Once we lose that or try to start taking ourselves very seriously, it would just be obnoxious. But so the sort of odd names that people give themselves do come out of that. But the end point, I think, of any fandom fundamentally has to be to have fun.
Right.
Once you lose track of that, once you start getting angry about no, it's not the new kids who walk across my lawn aren't doing it right, then you've really lost the whole point of that.
Gotcha.
thing.
And have you had moments like that where you've had kind of and then you have to stop and step back and think, okay, wait a second, let me reassess what I'm doing here?
Myself, not so. I don't think so. I try to be interested in what other people are doing.
Okay.
It certainly has brought me in contact with people whose interests I would not have wound up coming in contact with them before. Folks who are just very into engine modifications, folks who are very into doing things involving steelwork and blowtorches in their houses and kitchens. People who are into interior design and decorating. So it really, I find, has broadened my experience and outlook. I would not have encountered the Lolitas otherwise, and all their own thing and all very creative. So it's really been a good way for me to explore. One of the things for me has been because it does trace back to an earlier historical era, it's been a very useful organizing principle for me to explore my own profession and where that comes from.
Okay.
The character, the persona, is a asylum superintendent, an alienist. As I said, I am a psychiatrist. That's how I spend my work days and what I do. And it's been a good way to really look back at where my own profession really came from, where the ideas that animate my own profession really come from. So when I've appeared at steampunk conventions as a panelist, what I have is a presentation on the Victorian-era lunatic asylum. And I use the word lunatic because that's what they called them at the time. What I do with the talk is compare and contrast the 19th century sense of responsibility towards people with mental illnesses. With the 21st century, you're on your own. Lack of responsibility. So one of the things I was very conscious of in developing that talk is I would be giving it to audiences who, just on a basis of statistics, a fair number I knew were going to have experienced mental health care from the other side of the nurse's station than the one I'm customarily on. And I'm very honored that I have had a number of people come up to me and say they felt good after hearing my talk. But many aspects of our own practice in mental health treatment do date back to ideas from the 19th century. So it's been a vehicle for me in that way.
I was going to ask you something about that because when you had mentioned earlier in the interview about your character and your professional life share that common thread, and I was going to ask something along the lines of do you find you using steampunk to associate with patients?
I don't. Well, to look at me, you'll see I wear a waxed mustache. I wear mutton chops. The facility I work with a patient population that, in fact, does appreciate facial hair. Many of the men have beards, mustaches, because it's a military tradition.
Okay.
Facial hair is a military tradition. That's why Amish men don't wear mustaches, because they're peaceful people, and mustaches are, at the time that their faith was developing, was associated with the military.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's I learned something new today.
So, which I would not really have known had I not sort of investigated that through the steampunk. But so where it comes in is 19th century mental health treatment started with radical respect and a sense that, because they did not have medications, all they had was certain notions that in that era came out of some liberal Christian denominations, Universalist, Unitarian, and Quaker, of looking for the light within, and instead of chaining, beating, and manacling the mad to try to get them to behave better, just simply accept them. I accept that they're creatures of God as well as you are, and try to figure out a way that they can live a life. It led to the construction of the asylums, which were to be asylums from the 19th century, and a return to an earlier bucolic rural environment. So the idea was respect, good treatment, productive work in a healthy environment, plentiful, if somewhat bland food, and an organized day would have a positive influence on people. They're right, certainly it couldn't have hurt. Right. So many of the ideas of the therapeutic community, therapeutic work, pet therapy, social rhythm therapy, that now exist in bits and pieces in mental health care, come from the 19th century asylum.
And so we see that evolution even going through today, or is it?
We see threads, we see a crumbling. We see that these are available now in gold-plated, very expensive institutions that are not available to people without heritage trust funds. But the ideas still remain.
Okay. And that's, I'll tell you, that's a learning experience right there, but it also kind of crystallizes that which we have seen a lot of, and we've talked about amongst ourselves, usually during hey, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to talk about? And there's a lot of topics there that they need a lot more spotlight put on them, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, steampunk is another community we've sort of rubbed up against and interpenetrated with are people who do historical reenacting. Okay. The largest historical reenacting community in the United States is Civil War. Now, steampunks don't have to worry about, is the fly on my trousers historically accurate? But people who do historical reenacting can take many of the things they have in their closets anyway and bring that in. So steampunks do have an interest in history. At least many of us do. Again, many of the panels you'll go to at a steampunk convention are of historical interest.
Yes. Very cool. Very cool. Now, say Zach here and his epic beard wants to get involved with steampunk and in the Rochester Steampunk Club. How would he go about doing that?
I'd look at our Facebook page.
Okay.
You do a Facebook search for Rochester Steampunks. It's a open group. You'd look at the events, and you'll see our next event is early December at Knox. It gives a time, 7:30. So that's where we would gather. And then if we're doing other things, one or another of us will largely put it on that page.
Very good. And very non-judgmental group. So we could walk in not really knowing what we're doing and we'll be welcomed with open arms.
Steampunk has to be non-judgmental. It really does. It does not have an ideological core.
Okay.
Punk has an ideological core.
Right.
It's a political movement. But you will find Wiccan steampunks. You will find evangelical steampunks. You will find people on the left end of the spectrum. You'll find people who are Trump voters. There's an old Victorian principle. You don't, in polite company, you don't talk about religion. You don't talk about politics. So
just enjoy each other's company and leave it at that.
We leave it at that. So we've largely been able to do that. There are steampunk bands that come out of the punk tradition, the men who will not be blamed for nothing. They're very explicitly political, but there's no requirement that you listen to the band in order to be a steampunk. There's a strong recommendation from me that you do, but because they are funny and delightful, and if you haven't seen their video, the Gin Song, you need to do that before the day is closed.
The Gin Song.
Gin.
Okay. I'm jotting that down for myself.
I did look up the lyrics in the song of Just Glue Some Gears on it and call it Steampunk.
Okay, you found the lyrics for it?
Yes.
I mean, I asked you the question about the welcoming nature of it because one of the things that's very important to us as we run Flower City Comic-Con is the aspect of gatekeeping. And there are those who consider themselves experts, and I use air quotes when I say that, on their particular topics and their particular, their focuses. And so there are times where it may be difficult for somebody who's brand new to something to enter into a fandom of some sort because there's going to be somebody there to judge them and say, no, you need to know this, and this before you can hang out with us. So I like the more open arms, the more welcoming, more like we're just here to enjoy and bring back a sense of kind of like just that serene dignity that has been lost in a lot of circles. And so I truly appreciate how welcoming your team has been, your people have been.
Thank you. There certainly are gatekeepers around in steampunk. You'll run into them. The best way is probably to turn your chair kind of 90 degrees the other direction
there you go.
and talk to the other person. So the age spread is, I think, a bit larger. The spread of the types of music that people listen to is really quite wide, because there is no one single steampunk music or steampunk band. And as I said, it started with the visual aesthetic. One of the legitimate critiques of steampunk is there anything under the surface here? Is it anything other than just looking pretty in a certain way? And potentially, unless you decide to use it for something, that is a place that it can go.
Okay.
Myself, it's meant other things. As I gave the example of the historical exploration that it really prompted me to do as I was developing the talks. But other people can use it for other things. There's a sense of not only disability friendly, but altered ability celebration.
Okay.
The phrase, wow, what a wonderful prosthesis. You could hear that at the Paralympics. You can hear it in cosplay. You can hear it in steampunk.
Okay.
The sense that a lot of the steampunk devices have a prosthetic look to them.
I was noticing that while going through some pictures, and especially when I was doing my research to get ready for today.
Yes.
There's actually quite a bit that I wonder how much of it is costume and how much of it is actually that person is just taking advantage of the fact that they are indeed the bearer of a prosthesis.
Thomas Williford actually made a wearable art device, a wearable piece of artwork for a person who had a below-knee amputation on commission. He didn't make a medical prosthesis because he's not licensed to do so, but it's a very interesting piece of wearable art.
Gotcha.
That's only wearable if you are that one person with that specific below-the-knee amputation.
Customized.
Absolutely.
And that's outstanding. That's just, I see, and that's another thing I love about the aesthetic is it's not just the way it looks. There is a function to it, and it's not just a practical function, but a function of making you part of a community.
Steampunk aesthetic works best if it at least looks like it's going to function.
Right.
That's how you sort of distinguish it from just a random collection of decorative gears glued onto something. Although if that's your first costume and your first convention, certainly go right ahead. It's good to have beginners.
Yeah.
If you don't, you're going to cut off your own development
Gotcha.
At the roots and eventually wither. But you take something functional and make it beautiful, like the Datamancer computer keyboard. The standard black Dell or HP set works entirely well, but if you're going to fix up an old typewriter with reed switches so that it works, just like the keyboards in Terry Gilliam's movie Brazil.
Oh, yeah. I
did.
remember that. Yeah.
Again, that's a very steampunk aesthetic, but it came out before steampunk itself was a thing. You can go right ahead. So take something functional and make it beautiful, just because it's nice to be surrounded, to have beautiful things around you to look at. There's plenty.
That's why I have this panel around me. Well, except for Zach, but I never
Especially Billy, though.
Especially Billy.
What? No.
Billy's awesome.
Ugh.
There's plenty of ugly in the world. I feel we all have a responsibility
Yes.
to
do what we can about it.
To do what we can to make the world a more beautiful place.
And that's I like that idea very, very much. And so we're gonna wrap on that particular thought alone. Just take that away. That there's a lot of ugly in the world, and we do our part to kind of brush past that or change it and make it better and build and create.
Each in our own way.
Each in our own way. Is there like a parting like a goodbye that you use in your club? Like a farewell that a standard?
That there isn't. Again, the old line science fiction nerds would say live long and prosper, which I think is a good way to end just about anything.
That works. Well, then live long and prosper, sir, and we thank you for your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And we do appreciate it. And we hope to see you at Flower City Comic-Con in June.
Ooh, looking forward to that.
Awesome. Outstanding. And so that is, dear listeners...
No, I hit it. There we go. I hit it a little early a second ago. So.
Not a problem, man. And that is your introduction to Steampunk. We invite you to look into it, read about it.
December 2nd is their social at Knox.
Outstanding. So come to FC3's living room and partake and get to meet Eric.
I actually have an outfit, too, I could wear.
Yes, you do.
I just have to find the hat and the goggles.
Yes,
My
you
kid
do.
took them.
And so for Dolly and for Zach and for Sherry and Chris and for Tanya and for Billy and for myself, I am Chris. And thank you again, Eric, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
This has been your Monkey Business for the week, a product of the Flower City Comic-Con and the Mighty Monkey Corporation, purveyors and producers of the said Flower City Comic-Con, coming at you June 9th and 10th of 2018. Like us and find us on Facebook, and we will talk to you again next week.
Bye.